How's it going, everyone? So today I'm going to be focusing on what's known as ETFs. So we're going to be understanding exactly what an ETF is and how it can be helpful for a range of investors. Now, I've been mixing up my videos recently, and each week I select a random article from TechCrunch. So it's mainly tech-based, and the article that I'm going to be looking at is the one relating to Amazon firing employees due to a leaked email address and phone number. So I'm going to be reviewing the article and explaining my thoughts. So let's talk about the main aspect of this video, which is ETFs. So an ETF stands for an exchange traded fund. Now that still doesn't really mean a lot to anyone, and so I'm just going to make it as simple as possible. So those who have seen my channel before, I generally pick individual stocks and buy the associated shares. And so we have a bunch of examples on the left-hand side here, a range of different companies. And investors such as myself really enjoy the process of looking at a given company, seeing how they perform, and of course hoping that the underlying asset grows, but also that there is a high amount of dividends on top. Now, other investors may want to have more of a hands-off approach, and that is totally fine as well. Not everyone wants to drill down into specific companies and keep track. It's a lot of work and a lot of overhead. And any type of good portfolio should also invest in the likes of an ETF of some sort. So going back to what an ETF is, all it is a collection of securities. So what that means is you could have an ETF which combines a range of different companies and it tracks the performances of those companies. Quick announcement. Are you interested in starting your own investment journey and want to receive a free stock worth up to £100? All you have to do is create an account and deposit £30 or more. Trading 212 is available for European residents also, so head over to the link in the description. Okay, so there's actually many different types of ETFs, and when you're first deciding which ones should I add to my portfolio, it can be very tricky. And so if I just type in ETF, we can see that we have a range of different types. So we've got the Vanguard S&P 500. Now, if we scroll down a little bit, we can also see we have an iShares version of the S&P 500. And in fact, there's a whole other range of different ETFs that track just this one type of fund. Now, going back to the Vanguard S&P 500, what's actually happening is that the company Vanguard is tracking the underlying index of the S&P 500. And similarly with iShares, they're doing exactly the same. Now, there are slight differences when we look at, say, the Vanguard S&P 500 versus the iShares S&P 500. And so just taking the iShares S&P 500, if we do a quick Google search, which I looked into earlier, we can actually see that the iShares gives more US equity exposure. And so the numbers are 36.5% compared to 31% for the likes of Vanguard. Now, at the same time, there's less exposure to Canadian equity. And so what is important is that there are still certain differences within a given ETF that is tracking the index. So you definitely have to do your own research to make sure that the given ETF is tracking what you're interested in and that you are being given exposure to the types of markets that you also care about. So all of these companies within the Trading 212 and on other platforms, you have a situation where an ETF can itself track another ETF. And so a lot of these ETFs here are just tracking the underlying index. And that is why you can have so many different variants. And on our screen, we just have the two for the S&P 500, the Vanguard, and the iShares. But there's even more if you look at different brokerage firms. So regardless whether or not you are investing into an ETF that is tracking another one, you are still having that exposure within the underlying index. And in this instance, the index is the S&P 500. Therefore, if you want to buy a range of different ETFs, then you need to think about what type of index are you interested in and go from there. And so another example of an index is what's known as the FTSE 100. and the FTSE 100 comprises of the top 100 companies with the highest market capitalization listed on the London Stock Exchange. So we have another example of an index, and here we have an ETF which is supplied by the company Vanguard and is an ETF tracking the underlying index. And again, down here, iShares, there's another example which tracks the FTSE 100 as well. So if you just want to invest solely on ETFs, then you can totally do that. It is actually a lot easier sometimes just to buy a set number of ETFs or use dollar cost averaging that we showed in the previous video to continually buy at an average cost. And such approach can be a lot easier than the types of techniques that I deal with. Equally, if there are investors that buy into a range of different companies like I do, then you can always add ETFs to your portfolio, and that just lowers your level of risk in the event of recessions. So I'm now going to switch my focus to this TechCrunch article in which Amazon has fired a number of employees for the leaking of customer email addresses and phone numbers. So this article actually grabbed my attention because if we think about the issues in the tech industry, where there has been many mentions in the past of large corporate companies that have accidentally leaked customer-based information from their services. So if we think about the troubles that Facebook had throughout 2019, which generally stemmed from leaking customer-based information, it's quite interesting to see this new stance that's taken place by firing employees of a given company. So if I just scroll down, we can see that what actually happened was customer-related email addresses and phone numbers were passed to a third party. So the article doesn't specify how the information was passed. Was it to another individual? Was it through a different service? So I guess the question we have to ask ourselves is, what was the exact motive of these employees for sharing personal information? For instance, if I'm just an Amazon employee, whether I'm working in the tech industry or, say, customer support, I can't really imagine what I would want to do if I had access to email addresses and phone numbers from a range of random individuals. So all I can really infer from this article is that it had to have been a little bit more malicious in terms of stealing a large number of individuals' information, similar to how a hacker will retrieve a large amount of customer-related emails and generally passwords. For all I know, it could just be a wannabe developer that writes a random script to try and pull out information from Amazon's database. And so the article also mentions how no other information relating to what I assume is an Amazon-based account. So the article also shows the types of emails individuals were being sent out to confirm whether or not their email and phone number was involved from the violation, which I think is really good. Thankfully, I didn't receive one of these emails, but it also specifies that no other information was leaked. So again, that leads me to believe this is a rogue wannabe developer, and I assume they are trying to sell that information on to another type of company. But all we can really do is infer because the article is extremely vague. So apparently a similar issue to this happened last year, and as always, Amazon doesn't disclose all of the details. But the positive here is that individuals that were affected by the breach were notified. Now, at the same time, I feel as though there is some level of double standards. Whenever a large company experiences a breach that is down to buggy software, the company manages to pay a small fine compared to the amount of revenue the company makes. Whereas when there is a subset of employees that are leaking information, the burden's always placed on the customer. So I definitely wouldn't want employees at Amazon leaking my personal information. At the same time, this leak was related to email addresses and phone numbers, and although it's extremely annoying when you receive random phone calls, there's a lot worse information that could be leaked, such as credit card based information. So definitely interesting to see Amazon's actions to their employees. I guess I would just like to have more context as to what actually happened rather than a very vague statement. So with that said, I want to thank everyone for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.